So I was listening to the last episode of Voices River City, as I am wont to do. Well, I actually do it directly after every time you guys are finished recording, because then you send your things to me and I mix it all together into the show that you have all come to know and love. What I'm trying to say is that, well, yeah, I feel like I'm basically 98% of this show, but it's all behind the scenes, you know. So
right.
I'm just coming out to claim all of the credit for it.
You should, because we love you, Skylar.
Yeah, I'm on the show without Dave, so I'm just gonna take all of the credit for everything that both of us do. So anyway,
no one's here to argue that.
To go back to where I started this. So I'm listening to the show last week, and we start off with Flo. You're talking about like your friend signing up for dating services, and then when guys match with her, instead of them going out with her, they go out with you.
That is correct.
And this was sort of floated as like
modern dating,
like an idea that like isn't completely bananas and kind of fucked up. So I was like listening to it being like, am I taking crazy pills, or is this like an extremely dishonest approach?
Okay, tell me why you think it's dishonest. Tell me why you think it's dishonest.
I don't know. Well, okay, so first off, if I'm going to talk about this, I'm going to say, before we even get started on this, I think of you as like a beacon of morality and things that are good. And I don't think I know the friend that you're doing this with, but I am going to assume in good faith that this person, because you are one of the most amazing people I know, is also amazing by proximity.
Like proxy? Okay.
Yeah.
Yes. Okay.
Exactly. So that is where I'm coming.
Diffusion, not osmosis. Osmosis is about water, and diffusion is about lower concentration to higher concentration.
Okay, science.
So, okay, sorry.
All right, thanks, Bill Nye. Anyway, so I want to preface it like that, because I am gonna it's hard for me to describe why I think this is a bad idea without it like sort of I'm making a judgment on what you guys are doing.
Okay.
So I want to like preface it with like,
sure.
I love you.
Well,
I'm assuming I would love this other person. It's not. I'm not commenting on either of your characters here.
Okay.
So first off, I think I guess there's probably people who didn't listen to the last week's episode. Flo, do you want to just run us through kind of the premise of what it is that you're doing with your friend here?
I only listened to last week's episode because of Skylar's reaction to last week's episode, and I fucking hate this shit.
Okay, so literally last Wednesday, before we recorded the show, I went over to my friend's house and sat down with her and another friend, and I signed up for one of the online dating apps. And in so doing, we chose her pictures. We went through all the things that were on her list. And we had talked about this beforehand, about how much she hates first dates and because she's an introvert and I really enjoy them. And so she was like, she didn't want to get on the apps because you have to go through all of these first dates in order to be able to decide if there's somebody you want to go out with. And so we set up her profile, and then I go through knowing her very well and knowing what she wants. And I've already said out loud, like, this is what I think you're looking for. She's like, yep. And so I go through and I screen for potential matches. And then if they like her profile back, I send them this message. And it says, this is her friend Flo. We set up her profile together. She's an introvert, and as mentioned in her profile, she hates first dates and loves fifth dates. And as an extrovert, I love first dates. Yes, even the awkward and weird ones. So since we know each other so well, we decided to put our strengths to use as she ventures into dating. Here's how it works. I use the app to select, chat with, and meet up with guys I think she'd like to see if the vibe is right. If it is, then you go out with her. Why? This allows her to skip the many pitfalls of first dates, again, that she hates and I love, and have her first dates with all the comfort of a fifth date. And I was like, I know this is unconventional, but we figured a good first test of the vibe alignment is if you're up for this fun. So are you in to do some pre-dating with me? And then they get to answer. And right now, 7 or 8 people have responded, and and so there's kind of been communication in the app. I've actually communicated with one of them off of the app and set up a meetup for Friday. So we're honest about it. And if they ask me like, you know, well, can you tell me more about yourself? I do. If they're like, can I see a picture? I'm like, sure. I've even sent some of them to last week's podcast so that they know like I'm a real person.
Okay,
I'm
well,
talking about this. It's not a catfish, right? So now tell me what your objections are.
I mean, okay, so for one, it's her pictures on this profile,
her pictures,
right? So
yes,
they swipe, they match, thinking they're matching with her.
They are matching with her. They're just going through me as a screener before they get to her.
But they're not really matching with her. They're matching with you, who will then see if they're a match for her.
But they're matching with her in that I know what she's looking for from the app. So I'm looking for people who are in that age range, who have the right things in their profile, who I know kind of what she's looking for, like what she's attracted to physically. So I'm going through and I'm looking for those things and saying, hey, this is a potential. Let's see if the personality is right so that she doesn't have to go. So she can go on like 1/8 of the first dates that she would have to otherwise.
Okay, so I'm coming at this from the perspective of somebody who is like your friend. So it's been a minute for me, but I do not enjoy dating. I hate first dates. It is extremely awkward. It's extremely uncomfortable. And it puts me in a place where I feel really uncomfortably vulnerable with somebody I don't know. And it kind of forces me into this situation where I have to be vulnerable and I have to come at it from... It makes me come at it from this really honest place because I'm coming to a situation that I'm not comfortable with. And the thing that kind of makes it work, right, is that you sort of assume, and 90% of the time you're right, that the person on the other end of the date is feeling kind of in a similar way, right? And so it's this like, really, it's this pretty vulnerable exchange. And it takes a lot for me. Like if I'm swiping through an app, it takes a lot for me to like reach out and contact somebody because that's not really... And of course, so I also, to preface this is my experience. This is my thoughts and feelings, my preferences. I also want to recognize that dating apps are super different for men and women. And that's like a dynamic that I'm not going to be able to like understand both sides of. And I want to say that up front. So it's out there.
But wouldn't it be better if your first date was with me, Skylar?
No, it would not.
No.
Don't say it with your chest like that.
And here's, it's okay. I guess the thing that I want to say to your friend is like, if you aren't ready to date, that's okay. Like, it's fine to not want to date. Like, not wanting to go on those first dates is completely fine and is a preference that a lot of people have. If you're single, sometimes you just turn those apps off for a few weeks because it's kind of too stressful and you just don't want to think about it for a minute. And everybody does that because, you know, like I said, for folks like me, and it sounds like your friend, dating can be a stressful thing. And you don't really want to be having those first conversations with people. You don't really want to be going on dates, but you kind of power through it because, like your friend, I also like going on the 5th date, you know? But that first date is part of the experience. It's a non-negotiable. Having that moment with somebody and coming and meeting somebody where they are at and them meeting you where you are at, to me, is a non-negotiable part of that thing. And if you aren't willing to have that moment of awkwardness and that moment of honesty and that moment of kind of being emotionally naked with a stranger, which is kind of to a degree what you're doing on a first date, then like you shouldn't be on a dating app, and that's okay. Like it's okay to not want to do that, but it's not okay if somebody else, especially somebody else, is coming from a place of vulnerability, and somebody is like you are putting a lot of trust in somebody when you match with them and sign up for a first date. And so to have your first interaction then be somebody being like, haha, but it's really a different person, to me is like on its face. It's like the worst possible way that you could start it. And I can only speak for myself, but if I matched with your friend and got that message, like if you just start with games like that, I would be like, oh, absolutely not. And I would feel offended, honestly. Like I would be angry about that.
That's fine. And you know what? That is the first screener. And that is why, I mean, the primary reason I didn't hook her up with you is because you're not single. But the secondary reason that I didn't hook her up with you is because the vibe isn't right. So like, this is the first vibe check, right? It's like, are you up for the are you up
she
for
should be doing the vibe
fun?
check, I think.
But
it's her date. It's her life.
But she's still going to go. I mean, eventually she's going to go out with some of you. But also, here are the responses that we've gotten. Some people have said nothing because they probably feel the same way you do. Some people have had questions and I answer and they're like, this is like a little bit. And then some people's answer is like, okay, this sounds like fun. Her profile, this is hilarious. This is kind of mysterious. I like, so what I'm trying to say is, yes, it absolutely is not for everyone. And that's kind of what dating is. Everybody's not for everyone. But if you want to date this person and join this crew, this is the most mild of the shenanigans we're up to.
But what if what if they don't want to date a crew? What if they just want to meet a person and go on a date?
But then you just don't want to date. Like, I think that's part of, like, sometimes we feel like.
What if you don't want the crew first thing? What if you want to get to meet the person? What if you want to go the traditional route of meeting the person and then meeting the crew once you've been hanging out for a minute?
You're not for her. I mean, because there also are cultures where like a matchmaker is standard. Like everybody's dating situation is different.
Well, there's cultures where like dads auction their daughters off to rich guys.
Okay, I'm saying like there's cultures where people come together and they like entrust a third party to help them with that selection process. So it's not as if this is like an entirely new concept. And I think what we're saying here is that like no love lost if you're not interested in this setup. This is the setup. You can say no, and that is your right to do, and that's fine. But
yeah, and again, I'm not.
Then that's the screener, and that's why I only have 7 dates as opposed to the 325 from all of the men who have liked her profile.
I mean, I guess I feel the same way about this that I feel about people who like wait till marriage to have sex, right?
Sure,
like I think that is inherently a bad idea. Now, a lot of people, like some people choose to do it that way.
Yeah.
And some of those people have like super successful relationships where they turn out to be sexually compatible and everything's great. That doesn't change the fact that I think that inherently that's a bad way to go about marriage. I think that's a terrible way to.
For you.
I think it's a bad way for anybody to go.
I don't think that we can make a universalism because people are very different and they need different things.
I don't know. I've been talking a lot.
I have a question,
Shannon.
Okay, so this is a whole vibe check thing. If they're cool with it, then they pass the vibe check. Would you be as okay if the other side was doing the exact same thing to you?
Yeah.
Okay.
But also I'm an extrovert. So what I found, at least so there's only one person who I've actually set a date up with. There are 7 who I've kind of been communicating with who said they're interested, and we haven't gotten to that place yet. But what I have found is that it seems to me, I mean, I'll ask them, but like, it seems to me like they also get the opportunity to do a little bit of screening. So like, what's this like? And like, what is she into? And like, they get to kind of take the ease off. And then when they first meet up.
Well, they have to have that though. They don't have the choice to not have it.
Right. But when they first meet up, then they both get to also like talk about this quirky experience that they've kind of had together, but not together. And I think it can possibly take some of the like pressure off of the first date because you have this funny thing that you have and you can kind of like triangulate around this weird experience of like, you all already have a mutual friend, right? You both have met me, both know me. You can talk about what that was like. Like, I think there's something like interesting about it. It's like, it's not traditional, Skylar, but it's.
Shannon, what do you think?
Shannon, what do you all?
No, I hate it. I cannot get through like the conversations about people's various dating styles are causing me to want to put pencils into my eyeballs and ears because I do not get any of it. I'm just like, whatever. It's not like a universal, I'm not making like a universal morality judgment on whether or not a person is good or bad based on how they prefer to put themselves out there to the world. But I will say that as somebody who really values transparency and vulnerability, it does feel a little too kitschy and like not fully transparent or vulnerable to me. And I 100%, I say that 100% knowing that like It's just a stylistic difference.
Yeah.
But I could not run fast enough away from a scenario like this. Like,
yeah, I also wouldn't hook her up with you.
No,
I mean, for a few other reasons as well. Like, you're married, you're a woman, right? Like, but,
I mean, sure. Yeah. I guess I also am like confused about how anyone has the time to date for somebody else in addition to for themselves.
It's definitely not for the free meals.
Are you asking me? Are you?
No, I'm not asking. I'm just
anyone is, I think it's just me.
Well, sure. I mean, you surely are not like the first person that I don't know if any idea is original. So like, surely this isn't like the first time that this has actually like come into practice, but where do you find the time for? I don't understand how you have the time for this.
Evenings and weekends.
Yeah. Our ideas of fun are so
preferably
different.
Weekend evening. But that's the difference is like, I don't mind meeting new people. So this is fine. Like,
but
on Friday, I'm going to a Kings game with this, but like I had tickets to the Kings. Like, it's just like, okay, we're going to go. Like, you like basketball? Like, let's like, at the end of the day, I get a life story out of this. And there's one more person on this very wide, vast planet that I've met. And if they happen to be somebody who like is cool with my friend, then great. Like,
but why?
Sure.
I just don't like that. The way that you just talked about that centers you and your experience in a situation that somebody approaches thinking is between them and another person and not.
Well,
you.
the reason I'm centering that is because Shannon's question was like, why would she's basically asking, why would you waste your time? And I'm like, well, it's not really.
I'm not saying waste. To me. No, I'm not saying why would you waste your time. I'm saying where do you find the time?
Where do you find the time? And I'm like, well, it's like going to a networking event, except I don't have to work the room. I just get to like meet somebody new. And, you know.
I think also part of the reason why I have like a gut reaction of like blech to this is I am an introvert and I really dislike because I'm an introvert, I don't want like the first date, like the generalization of introverts, because I also like first dates do suck, whatever. But I think it is something that like we make a choice to enter into, right? Just as this person has made a choice not to enter into them. But there was a part of me that was like, this is not like introvert, extrovert. Like, this is not like specific to people being introverted, extroverted. This is just like an additional layer that has been created as a coping skill for somebody who's introverted and as a benefit for somebody who's extroverted. And fine. But there are lots of us introverts in the world who also want to shit our pants when we think about sending a friend out on a first date for us, because that still means that you have to meet that person for the first time at some point. Only this time, like, you have access to information about them that is potentially different, but also, or that is definitively different, but also not so different from the information that you're just reading on a dating profile, because you're still getting it through a third party. Trusted, obviously, because it's a person rather than just like typing shit in. But there should probably be some sort of like Discovery Plus program on this, like a la MILF Manor for this kind of shit, because somebody is going to watch it and love it. That somebody will not be me, because I'm busy waiting for season 2 of MILF Manor, which is my trash TV.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, PJ, are you into it?
Okay, I will say, Skylar made some good points, and initially I was just like, okay, well, it's not really fair that one person's being vulnerable and the other person isn't necessarily.
Voices debate camp.
But then once you made the point that, you know, it kind of takes the pressure off the other person as well. The vulnerability, it's not as much of a, they're not as bought into it really, because they have this kind of out because you're not the person that they matched with. And so I will give it just a little more casual in that respect. And I do think that I can get behind that, because I just feel like it takes the pressure off of both people. And I don't think that it necessarily puts the other person in a more vulnerable position that's being experimented on.
Yeah, they don't have to tell me anything they don't want to.
Experimented on.
Like, I'm honestly there to share information about my friend. Like, they can tell me whatever they want or not. I'm really just like,
Well, and I do like the confirmation. Like, honestly, like one of the things that you said, Shannon, was that, yeah, it's a repetition of what's in the profile, but it's a repetition, but it's also a confirmation. So like Flo's gonna be able to be like, this right here, that's bullshit. He was not down with that, or he was not down to like do whatever. He was very like regimented or whatever, and you're not gonna be cool with that type of stuff.
No, but my thing was not that it was going to be repetition, but that it's like where is the difference aside from that you're not having sort of like a one-dimensional exchange of information? Like what's the difference between meeting someone as like through a dating profile versus a friend like spouting the things off? And I guess like, again, that's just me fucking spitballing here. And I'm not like, I feel like this conversation has gone off the rails and it's taking up a whole fucking episode.
It is.
And
okay.
I'm not here for it.
This is my last comment. So I had this conversation with a group of folks, all of whom were Black. And one of the Black women said that she really appreciated being able to like the concept behind this, in part because she felt like for herself, her standards were much lower than what her friends think she's worth the world, and she'd be willing to compromise on things. And so she really liked having that screener because her friends are only going to pass along to her people that they really think would be a good fit for her. And because their standards are so much higher than her own, she might have better dating outcomes. And so I think that's another piece of this that may not be considered, is that for a lot of women, there also is this like, okay, well, I kind of take what I can get, blah, blah, blah. And I'm not saying that's my friend, but I think that there's the added benefit of that as well, of somebody else who has the freedom to be objective about it, to be less invested in it, to be like, you might go out with this guy and kind of like, but I'm saying he's not the one. And my standards are probably going to be more rigorous than yours. And so that might save you some, because we've all been, most of us have been in a relationship where we probably should have cut it off after the first couple of dates, but we let it drag on for a few months, right? And so just, that's another upside potentially to this, is like you save everybody the time of just like an incompatibility, because initially you're thinking with your reptilian brain and you're like, hot, yeah. And it's like, yeah, the vibe's not there.
Yeah.
That's all I'm gonna say.
Here's what I will close out on. I would be 100% good with this concept if you put in the thing. So if I'm swiping through on your profile, if it says this profile is maintained by my friend, and if you swipe with me, she's going to contact you, and then this is going to happen. So like if you set that up, so if that's the expectation going in, then I don't have an issue with this. Like, y'all should do things however you want to do it. My thing is the thing where I swipe thinking I'm getting a thing, and then I'm immediately like, oh no, you are actually getting a different thing, and it bugs me because it's one-sided. And because, yeah, like you're having this, like potentially you are inviting this fun experience. And I don't disagree that probably this is going to work great for some people, but you are deciding for someone else that this is how their dating experience is going to go. And you are not giving them the opportunity to decide if they want to sign up for that before they swipe. So I would say that the ethical way to go about this is to put it in the profile that says, this account is maintained by my friend. We're doing a screening process. These are my pictures. If you think this looks good and swipe on it, great. My friend will reach out and we'll go from there. I think if you say that up front.
I thought that was already in the profile. Fuck, this is a whole episode on this.
We'll clarify another time.
This is a wild.
No, it's like as soon as the match happens, that's the first message that I send to people.
Right. Okay.
So they don't even usually get a chance to reach out first. I'm just like, hey, I just want to let you know, blah, 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 blah. Because the way this app is set up, there's not really a lot of space to be able to get into other stuff. So it's like before you even get, and like all they have to do is click heart. So it's not like they've poured their heart out to somebody. It's just like,
right.
Like this person. Yes,
after seeing some of like the swiping videos you see online.
Deal.
I don't think it's that big of an investment for most people.
Yeah, I don't think so either. Especially the number of guys ranting about people leaving them on red after swiping. I don't think a whole lot of people are like investing that much.
Yeah, but there's a lot of guys who are not having that experience. I just want to make space for that as well. As a nervous dater, I guess I feel compelled to stand up for all the other men who are not complaining about being left on red because they hit a heart every time they see a picture. We do exist, and it is an awkward experience for us as well.
In
Okay.
summary, this is the episode where Skylar and Shannon get canceled by all of Flo's friends.
I love it. All right, let's get into the other things we were going to talk about. Wait, Skylar.
Yeah, before we do that, for one, I actually have a thing I have to go do, so I'm gonna go do that. We're gonna listen to a song, and then we'll do the Patreon pitch and get into the show. Yeah,
Let's do it.
Hell yeah.
Yep.
hell yeah.
Always said the things they said. Always said some from those dead. All the voices heard. Always said things we say. Always said they're in your head. All the voices heard.
Yo, everybody, what's up? You've got Shannon here.
And Flo.
And PJ.
And no Kempa. And no
and we
more
yeeted
Skylar.
Skylar out of here.
Yeah, we just
Yeah.
yeet. But before we get the party started and talk about the hot tea of the day, if you enjoyed that opener, if you enjoy what we do on the other side of the song, consider becoming a patron. You can find us at patreon.com/voicesrivercity. We love the work that we do here, but it is work, and we'd love to have you support it. So, get on that Patreon. Also follow us on the socials, particularly on the Bird, because we put some things out there pretty frequently. Yeah, but let's get into it, shall we?
Mm-hmm.
So this week, just like a lot of things have happened, and if you were privy to our Voices thread, you would see that there is just a smattering of what should we talk about this week. And where we landed is this. Is the name Sean Laloe familiar to anyone here?
Sounds like someone lives in a different county.
He's the person who definitely lives in District 2 with his employees and their families and 9 cars on the yard.
As employers often do.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Especially employers whose wives and kids live in Granite Bay and go to school there.
Yeah.
In like $1 million homes.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so we're all talking about the same person. We brought this up a few episodes ago, or at least I think we did, and I guess I didn't confirm that there was a mixer event in, well, does anybody remember where it was at? Natomas Business, like a metro mixer of some sort. I should have prepared for that. But anyway, there's a mixer, all these folks in one room, getting to know each other. And there was a woman there who ended up hitting record on her phone after the council member verbally assaulted her, called her names, just really, really went for her. She showed up at city council last night to publicly just let everybody know who he is and how he do. Does anybody want to get into that any further so we can?
When her mom called in afterwards later on in off agenda, her mom called in to confirm it as well, and she played the recording for the entire council to show how he was basically still berating her even after she had started recording.
So this is the woman is the daughter of a former employee of Sean Laloe, who he sued for slander. And he ended up, that suit ended in not in his favor. He ended up having to pay out over 30 grand on that. Not unsurprising, actually. But so this is the reason why he approached her daughter, because I guess he recognized her at the mixer and then came up to her and started talking shit about how her mom sued him. And anyway, on and on he went to say some really, really shitty things. And also it's like pretty aggressive when you listen to it. I mean, there's a lot of background noise in the recording, but he really just goes for her. And she multiple times is like, what are you doing? Like, walk away. I'm not interested in this conversation with you. And he just, as he does, and we've seen this happen time and time again, you know, I have not been in the room when he has done this, but he recently went after some advocates at a council meeting and verbally
afterwards,
after the council meeting. And he just doesn't know when to quit, right? He's one of these like the embodiment of toxic masculinity, it seems like.
Well, and he will like noticeably like laugh while people are like, while she was giving testimony, he was laughing at them. He was very dismissive of the things that they were saying to him and to the council about him.
I have a question for you all, because in my, recollection, this is at least the third time that Councilmember Laloe has engaged in behavior like this, behavior that one might say violates decorum.
Right.
And my question to you all is, why do you think that the shouting of decorum from the dais and the requirement of decorum seems to only be applied to people who are experiencing the oppression of a system that has not met their needs, but is not required of the person with privilege and power and proximity who sits on the dais? I'd really like an answer to that question.
I mean, same. I think it is like, so what happens often is that when people in positions of power are trying to make a statement of any kind, right? Like, and then the people come up against that. The person who's in the position of power is using their authority to try and silence them. And I think that's what it is. It's an abuse of power. It's an abuse of their authority in order to take up more space for themselves. And it's wild to, I guess it's not wild to me. It's not confusing. There's nothing about it that is, surprising. I guess it's just like, it's frustrating that we continue to find ourselves in this space where people who are freely given shit tons of room to say whatever the fuck they want to say and do whatever they want to do without consequence. Certain electeds, for example, just continue to take and take and take, right? Like it feels like just like shitting on the process, which it is, I don't know.
Well, I feel like it's largely also just they're protecting their own ability to call out decorum in the future when issues arise on their ends. They want to make sure that it's an unquestioned authority in the face of this sort of questioning group of folks. Kind of similar to how, like, when cops will back each other up, even if they don't necessarily agree with what another cop is doing, they'll still back them up because on the off chance I need your back later on, you're going to have my back. So it's that kind of protection of the authority in the room rather than actually addressing the issues at hand. And basically, they know they can take the power away from those people so easily because Mindy's up there with little mute switch and all that sort of stuff. So,
but there's a fragility to their operations that is only one-sided. So they're allowed to be hurt when people are laughing at them or when people use, like stern language or shout or whatever it is that, rankles them. But the moment that a council member, an elected member of the body, someone with wealth and power and resources comes and does something arguably worse to a constituent or just a member of the public, there's silence. Like, where is the censure? Yeah. Where is the public, like admonishment of this behavior?
Right.
I'm struggling with, we've seen them yell at people who are there to protest or people who are there with hurt feelings, but like when the same is happening in reverse, everybody is silent. And yeah. So it doesn't give you the moral high ground when you engage in that way.
Yeah. And I think last night at council, so the the woman who he like verbally assaulted, the word accosted has also been used to describe this interaction. Her name, I don't think I mentioned her name previously. Her name is Angela Grijalva, and her mom's name is Maria, same last name. She's a person who is like an official ambassador for the Natomas Chamber and was like working at that event, right? So she comes out to council last night and like, you know, gives her she used time in public comment, 2 minutes. And she went over time by a little bit, but she ended up walking away. When her mom later came on, she asked for Laloe to be sanctioned, I think is the word that she used. And yeah, there was no response from any of the council members on this. Same thing happened when District 4 Council member Katie Valenzuela asked for Jeff Harris to be censured. Like, we've got folks who are asking for these elected officials who are definitely acting outside of whatever arbitrary definition of decorum is. And yeah, there is no accountability. Like it just simply does not exist within those elected bodies, unless like you're not falling in line, right, with the majority of, like, you know, unless you're not voting for the rook or whatever.
Right.
I don't know. I wish there was, like, if there was a reason it wouldn't happen, right? Like we could address the reason and potentially make faster change, but instead we just have to wait and hope that Laloe isn't reelected, because somebody who is willing to go to an event and call a woman a disgusting pig, a liar, a horrible human being, an instigator,
and he's saying that while being accused of human trafficking. Like,
right.
Love that for him.
Yeah, well, this guy is just like, yeah. I don't know. I guess we don't have to spend any more time talking about him. We have very much established that we are in camp Laloe, just stay in Granite Bay for always, please.
Yeah, it's frustrating to watch him just like time and time again just behave. I mean, you know, it's bad enough when your political positions are harmful to your constituents, but then to add on top of that the questions about where you live, and so whether or not they even should be your constituents, and then to add on top of that, right, like, you know, you don't believe in affordable housing, you're voting for things that your community members have expressed, you know, staunch opposition to, and then for you also to add the cherry on top is that you're disrespectful to them. Like, sir, like, sir, you I mean, at least out of those, pick one, please. Don't be all of the above. Like, nobody likes E, all of the above. Like, nobody ever thinks that that's a good choice. Don't do that.
Yeah. Well, I guess moving along, because if you can believe it, we are already we're already halfway through the show. More than halfway through the show. This week was a really tragic week in the unhoused community with deaths. There were 3 deaths. A woman died at Watton Longview. A man drowned near the island, and one other person was found dead in a trailer fire on Roseville Road. That person has yet to be identified. The woman from Watton Longview is Kimberly Crockle, 60 years old, and the man near the island is Christopher Allen Taylor, 40 years old. And then in addition to that, there was also a story released by T-Clift at the Sacramento Bee about a third unhoused person who died as a result of hypothermia this winter. Her name was Denise Egan. So we just kind of wanted to take some time to talk about that, along with the incredible takes coming out of the Bee. Let's see, there's a special to the Bee written by Matt Mahan, and that is dated March 22nd. So I guess first just taking a minute to talk about these deaths, and that they just keep happening.
I'll say that the one thing that's kind of struck me about the November death was that was right around the time we had gotten some rain. And it's one of those things that a lot of advocates have said multiple times, which is why the weather restrictions or the weather filter, whatever you want to call it, doesn't work for opening warming centers, is because you have these people that are, sometimes it'll be just one day we'll get someone wet. Think about it. Most people know this. When you look on the ground, when it's wet and then it's cold afterwards, it doesn't dry out. And these people aren't drying out. Lots of times their tents are wet on the bottom. They don't necessarily have the nice ones with like the tarp on the bottom or whatever protection, and it gets in on the top. And so you end up like, that's how hypothermia happens. And in that case, I think the low that day was like 43. So it wasn't even that low, but it's the wetness on top of it that just adds to it.
So, yeah, and it's really important to know, because I've written several affidavits about this, that when you're outside, if the weather drops even a few degrees, it puts you at risk for either hyperthermia when it's too hot or hypothermia when it's too cold. And if you add wetness to it, as PJ was saying, like, you can significantly increase the likelihood of hypothermia. And so if that can happen as high as 55 or even 60 degrees. It seems like that's like not cold enough for somebody to experience hypothermia, but it absolutely is.
Yeah, and I think like that is not something that is lost on advocates and direct service providers, but it does seem to be lost on the people who are in the positions of power making decisions around whether respite or shelter. One of the things we see quite often, like on the front lines, is like PJ is saying, when an unhoused person has to endure cold followed by rain followed by cold, just the number of negative health impacts that come as a result of that, and the amount of time that it takes to actually get a person warm and dry is like, it's really hard to wrap your head around. And at this, people who have done it time and time again, like where I work, we kind of have a process for trying to help warm people up after they come in from the cold. You watch like somebody's skin go from just like white to very, very slowly, like the color coming back into their skin. And also like not only the physical impacts of the cold, but the mental impacts of the cold, because you lose so much sleep, like you can't get comfortable, the physical impacts of your body, just like, being tense and tired, and just your executive function is like, it's a sliver of what it was, prior. And Denise, so Teresa Clift of the Sacramento Bee published a piece about Denise, and I knew her and worked with her for quite a while, for many years, in fact, and she struggled quite a bit. And as I said in the piece, she was a very, very sad person. She just carried a lot of sadness with her all the time, understandably, considering everything that she had to endure. But I think one of the hardest things about this death is that Denise knew that she would die, and she said that she would die. Like, she had struggled with the cold and being outside, and had gotten into shelter and lost shelter. And the last interaction I had with her just days before her death was, if I can't get into shelter, I'm going to die out here. And then she did.
Mm.
And that's the second time in my career at Lowe's that somebody has said to me that they're going to die if they don't get shelter. And then I find out that they have died a couple days later. And one of the things that has come up from this is like, oh, well, was she, one of the additional causes of death was substance use. She liked to drink. So it has come up a lot, like, well, why did she lose her shelter? And, are we really sure that it was hypothermia? Like, what if it was her alcoholism? And first of all, the county coroner has deemed that the reason that she died, or the medical staff at Sutter, the reason that she died was hypothermia. Like, she was not responsive when she arrived to the hospital, and the reason for that was hypothermia. But she had a number of other medical conditions, one of which was exacerbated by her drinking. So that's sort of where this piece, I don't even want to call it a piece because it's actual trash. In the opinion, this special to the Bee by Matt Mahan called, so the title is California Must Do More to Prevent the Deaths of Homeless Residents. Here's one way. And so you read that, and when I first clicked on it, I was like, interesting. Like, I'm always here for a
prevention,
take,
right.
Like, let's talk about it. That's sick. I'm all about prevention. And you very quickly, as you start reading this, come to find that this is the same old bullshit that is the story around like care court. We talked about that before, right? Like Newsom wanting to mandate that people get mental health services, like basically conservatorships. But so this whole like obligation to accept additional services in order to get shelter. So like this person says, nearly every night, another homeless Californian, or 2 or 3 or 12, dies on our streets. They pay the ultimate price for a failure committed by our state, the failure to provide the life-saving care that our most vulnerable residents need, but sometimes can't accept. It goes on to talk about it's time to free those suffering from treatable diseases and dying from preventable deaths by requiring them with appropriate safeguards to be in the treatment they need, not just to change their lives, but to save their lives. Thoughts?
The appropriate safeguards don't exist. They're always talked about in future tense. They rarely ever come. And I'm sorry, but like the first thing that when I ever heard this, the first thing I thought was, I can just see the cops already going like, you're an inconvenience committed. And it's like, and also this speaks to this person's lack of experience with the carceral system and acting like it's a better thing, or with the mental health care system and acting like it's a better thing.
Right.
It's not in either case. So it's not like, oh, it's going to be so much better in there for this person. I mean, one of the first things they do is go, cool. So you're a human being, autonomy out. And now we're going to deal with you how we feel like we can deal with you, which is already horrible in both those situations.
Yeah. I mean, look, I am as sympathetic to how complex it is to, manage the care of an adult with major, health challenges. My full disclosure of my, proximity to this is that my maternal uncle, my mother's younger brother, has schizophrenia and also like 15 other health conditions, chronic conditions, all of the things, right? And so I definitely can appreciate how challenging it is to be able to manage someone's care, especially when, at the times when he's not under care, his ability to reason and sometimes care for himself appropriately is challenged. And that makes it hard. And yet, I frequently say to my mother and my aunt that, as challenging as that is, there's a reason why some of these protections exist, because he is still an autonomous human being. And we still have to respect the fact that we can't override his will. We have to try to find ways to be able to support him. And so one of the things that I think is really frustrating to me is the absence of context. Just because he's a first-term mayor of San Jose does not mean that he shouldn't read a book about everything that's happened before he became mayor, because I was a child and didn't even live in California. And I know how much Ronald Reagan slashed so many of the mental health programs and the things that existed in California that could have provided treatment for people. And what really irritates me is right across from Sacramento's own jail is a mental health facility that on the door says no walk-ins, referral only. So you can't, like, people who want care can't get the care that they need. Let's start there. Like, there's so many other places we can start other than trying to compel people into things that are subpar. We could start by making available to the people who want care, quality care, emphasis on the quality. And I think that's the part that is frustrating to me is, I mean, this conversation goes into, Governor Newsom and Angelique Ashby and Kevin McCarty and Mayor Steinberg all got together recently to announce the 350, tiny homes that are going to be at Cal Expo. And in the same breath as announcing that, the first thing that Mayor Steinberg said was, and we have to compel people into housing. Listen, if it's a good thing, people will want it, and people will want it. And ask yourself the 5 whys when people say no, because you'll get to the root cause of why they're saying no. And what many people are saying is, I don't want to be in jail. If you're going to tell me that I can't bring my pets, if you're going to tell me I have to be back by 7 p.m., if you're going to I'm an adult. And just because I'm poor doesn't mean that I should have to give up my freedom to be able to move and go. So this is a country that is very confusing to me, because on one hand, they'll scream freedom when being asked to save their own lives by wearing a mask and getting a vaccine, but will then turn around and try to strip people of their actual freedoms to be able to move about the cabin at the appropriate time, because you're not a full human being because you're experiencing poverty. And it is morally frustrating to me, because we miss the point. There's so many people we could serve if we actually made services available and made services respectful of their full humanity. And the people who sometimes are even saying, I don't want that, we have to, again, ask ourselves the 5 whys, because we'll probably get to the harm that has come by them, by these services, or the ways in which these services are ineffective or operating on outdated or super religious or just other super oppressive frameworks. And I really want to ask people, do you want to help or nah? Because I really think this is an or nah, but you keep trying to put yourself into the camp of actually wanting to help. Do something. You want to do something. We've laid out the playbook, and you say, well, I want to do something, but not that. So you're not really about that life.
No, I mean, this really, it feels like it's the thing that always happens. And you have both, said this, it's bringing up it's calling a solution a thing that doesn't yet exist. Right. And more than that, or beyond that, it's also attempting to disappear people into systems that just oppress them and rob them of their dignity, rob them of their autonomy. I think I've been thinking so much about Denise since I found out about her death, because I didn't know that she died until last week. I just thought that she was not around, as it happens, with when you're someone working on the front lines with unhoused folks. And she desperately wanted shelter. She talked about shelter all of the time. And she had gone in and out of shelter, and, respite centers and warming centers and all of this. But what she would always come back and say was that she felt like a prisoner, or that she didn't feel respected, or that, when the first thing that happens when you go into a shelter program is a list of all the things you can't do, rather than a hello, how are you? How can we support you? I'm so glad you're here. It's quite evident that it's not going to be a space that affords a person any sort of hospitality, because you're always looking at people with a punitive lens or through the lens that says this person doesn't necessarily deserve what we are giving to them, and so they have to earn it by treating staff with a ridiculous amount of patience, even if the staff is not doing that to them, even if the staff is not reciprocating that. It makes so much sense to me that adult human beings don't want to be in shelters where they are treated like shit or where they are forced to walk on eggshells around staff that is not trained or not hospitable because they're afraid of losing their shelter space. And if you're someone who wants to have a fucking drink and you have to choose between a bed and a drink because the drink is what gets you through the traumatic experience of being unhoused, sometimes the choice is to have the drink because it can turn off the shit that's going on in your head. And there's just like such a failure to recognize, I think, like the really important detailed conversations around how to plan for unhoused people. But it can be quite simple and just first provide the quality services, which include housing, which include also
barrier housing.
Yeah, no, for sure. I mean, also how many people I can say I've come in contact with hundreds of people who on any given day are like, I actually don't want to be using anymore. Like, I want help. And the window of opportunity is so tiny, but there are no services available to them. Right. So it's like, well, if I have to endure yet another hour or another half hour and not have any services to help me through this, well, then I'm just going to keep using. And of course the fuck they are. Like,
well, and at this point, I was going to say, at this point, the county and the city have such a huge deficit to overcome. Even if they were offering the best services, you have to overcome all the harm you've done and the ways in which you've broken people's trust. So, and they're not even trying to get to the bare minimum of what we would expect people to be okay with, assuming none of that harm even existed in the past. And it's because so much of their system is built on like a one size fits all approach, which is why it's always like, it's always those rigid rules built on the convenience of the people serving rather than the convenience of the people being served, and meeting the people being served where they're at, what sort of needs they have, what sort of, like we've talked about before, where it's like putting, PTSD folks into congregate shelter, putting abuse survivors into co-ed housing. It's like none of that makes sense because you didn't care enough to talk to the people and figure out what was best for them. It was just, you should appreciate even being off the street. So you're going to take whatever we're going to give you. And it's like, no, you're coming from such the wrong place for any of that.
Something that has come up before in my conversations with people around like shelter and housing programs that require such rigid boxes to be checked is like, well, how does St. John's shelter do it? They have such high sort of like success rates with their shelter program. And they are a program that requires sobriety. They're also a program that requires work in exchange for shelter. It's folks who are like serving the program of St. John's in order to stay at they're like working this like very rigid program. And you've got to kick all of the habits in order to get in, right? And so this is not to say, this is going back to the dating conversation. It's not to say that that's not for some people. But by and large, in a community like Sacramento, where housing, shelter, and supportive services have not been available for a really long time at the clip that we need, they're like the problem is just so huge, and the number of people traumatized and harmed and in need there's a lot of work to do. And it's not as easy as 350 tiny homes, and it's not as easy as a vote about where to spend, ARPA money. And
Well, because if they've taught us anything, they'll put the tiny homes there and they'll give them no transportation anywhere.
Right.
They won't provide them basic services. They won't provide them shade. The effort is minimal at best.
Well, because what we want to do is like not we, but like people,
the royal we.
the royal we. It goes back to this like desire to disappear people into spaces where they are not impacting comfort, right? Like,
Yeah.
It's that, like, if I don't see or hear or have to deal with that issue, and if I can maintain my standard of living, great, put them out there because they're nothing but a problem anyway. Which is it's so deeply problematic when you then have a body of people who are like standing up for women's rights and doing this like a week of trans visibility and doing, like all of these like gestures around centering oppressed groups of people. It's like you can't talk out of both sides of your mouth. Like,
well, they're ignoring the fact that those populations are overrepresented in homeless populations. So it's like, so you're saying as long as you're above a certain class, then we should care for you because we recognize that, like Camp Resolution, there's a whole lot of LGBT folks out there. Do we care about them as much as
housing because they come out?
Exactly.
Yeah. I think the thing that is not lost on me is the fact that in our like broader culture, we are totally fine with people saying things like, it's wine o'clock, and woo, that's a hard day that needs a stiff drink. And the people usually uttering those sayings are comfortably housed, upper middle class, and wealthy people. And we see absolutely nothing wrong with that. And yet, so they could use a drink at the end of a hard day as a way to be able to self-soothe and self-medicate. But the moment that somebody doesn't have housing and is literally outside dealing with the elements, we haven't even gotten into the vermin yet. Like that's a conversation we don't get into all the time, is that like, if you're trying to keep food and things like that, and you're like, walking by City Hall, you see rats.
Oh,
right?
fleets of rats.
And mice and all kinds
and they're
of things
the size of cats
during the daytime.
Oh God, yes.
Okay, not to mention the stray cats, and not to mention all the other.
We're not talking about cats, Flo.
We also were talking about dating, but you somehow managed to throw that moral conundrum back in here. But like you're outside having to deal with all of that. You're stressed out because your last Zoom meeting went poorly and you need a glass of wine, and people are fighting for their lives or coming home and their stuff is gone and they're having to rebuild, we can't that's the part of the hypocrisy to me that is just really hard to swallow. It's like, I am not minimizing the importance of substance use and substance abuse and the impact that can have on our health and well-being. I'm also saying in the hierarchy of needs, like housing comes first, and it should not be conditional, because we don't condition it for anybody else. Nobody asked me if I was sober in order to be able to get a mortgage or qualify for rent. So why on earth is that suddenly the deciding factor here? And I think there's just a lot of examples of the classism that is so effortlessly baked into how we do things. And this is like a primary example to me of just us applying a standard to people that we would be appalled if someone applied to us.
Right. I mean, our housing status protects folks from so much fucking judgment, right? Like, how many, you think some of these electeds don't go home and get completely fucking shithoused after a meeting?
I have seen them. I have been in public with people who were thankfully riding with others because they were too intoxicated to drive.
It's like, and why is that? It's because you had a stressful day, or maybe it's just because you're trying to like get lit because you want to have because it's a celebration of something, whatever. But the inability to afford other human beings that same thing simply because they are unhoused. And yeah, to echo that, I think there is a huge need for robust AOD services in our community, for sure. And
in all of our communities.
Yeah, totally. I mean, we need harm reduction. We need needle exchange. We need, treatment for folks who are drinking a whole hell of a lot. We've got this opioid crisis. We've got all of these things, right? Those things also need to be addressed. Yes. But until we have established a standard level of care or service provision, then we can't come out and say people need to receive all of those services, or not even receive. People are obligated to take those services in order to receive shelter, housing, whatever. They don't fucking exist anyway. Mm-hmm. So the conversation needs to change. I don't know. It's really frustrating. I'm now grateful that we started the show with some lighthearted
yes.
Some levity.
Some levity, because we're ending with frustration.
With extreme frustration. I just wanted to, maybe close with, I pulled up the declaration that because I did a bunch of them, especially during the pandemic, to be able to try to provide some support for, some of the injunctions that were filed against some of the sweeps and the camps. And one of the things that I wanted to go back and look at the data, because, I'd like to be precise about this. And we were talking just a little bit about what impact the weather and exposure has on people. And so, you can have cold weather injuries that occur in the general population, which includes people who are comfortably housed on a regular basis at temperatures above 55 degrees. That's called low cold stress, moderate cold stress at 32 to 55 degrees, and high cold stress at less than 32 degrees. But the key thing that I wanted to be really precise in describing is that the likelihood of hypothermia increases by over 50% for every 10-degree drop in temperature, and also 10% for every 1 millimeter increase in precipitation. Now, I don't have to, I don't have to guess how 10-degree drops in temperature. So starting with 55 degrees and then dropping it down 10. So if we're talking about 42 degrees, we've already increased it 50%. Now, how much rain have we had recently?
Just so
feet.
Much.
So so we're not talking anymore in millimeters. We're talking, well into inches. And so, let's just the magnitude of this is just so significant that the high risk. And I was and if you're experiencing homelessness, you're spending prolonged periods of time outside, which makes you particularly susceptible to the detrimental effects of the hot and cold stress. So I just want to I just wanted to emphasize that with some actual numerical data. And I wanted to quote, the research on this, that this is not insignificant. And so the idea that someone would point to anything other than housing as one of the key ways that we can protect, that we can prevent the deaths of our unhoused residents is simply misguided.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I also, so let's wrap this up with a call to action. So one of the things that came out of yesterday at the council meeting is that Katie Maple called for a discussion around reworking the weather criteria, which is for opening warming centers. So that was something that was recently done, and we're seeing that it definitely needs to be done again. So she called for that, asked for a conversation to happen in the near future, which definitely should happen. But also want to mention that council member Katie Valenzuela called for the very same thing in January. So this is now 2 council members who have brought this to the dais, asking to have a conversation with the city manager around this. And so I think the call to action is just using our voices to call, write, to really mobilize folks so that we can make sure, that they don't forget that this is important. And it's a conversation that needs to happen super soon. Because as we found this week, unhoused deaths are just continuing to happen. And I suspect if, we're just finding out about a November death as a result of hypothermia in March, that there are probably more that we're going to find out about. Absolutely. So especially
with the rain.
This weather has just been horrible on the unhoused community. So in addition, I think, to writing in and calling in, really thinking about our unhoused neighbors, and if you have the capacity to donate to direct service and mutual aid organizations, DSA here in Sacramento really does some incredible work
Punks with Lunch,
folks.
Tag Community Table. There's a bunch of them. I mean, just search for mutual aid Sacramento. I'm sure you'll be able to find most of them.
Yeah.
NorCal Resist also does a lot of mutual aid.
And when, and if you have the capacity, when you are purchasing things, for folks, just really keeping in mind that solid bottom tents and tents that can really withstand weather it's important, and those can be really expensive. So tarps are also super, super helpful for unhoused folks.
Plastic sheeting, like landscaping, right. Plastic sheeting, that works really well as well, and it's a lot cheaper too.
And it's cost effective. Yeah, you can just cut them into 10 by 10 squares. So yeah, support the people who are out there supporting. The ones who are on the front lines really know our neighbors in really special ways and are able to meet their needs in ways that potentially those of us who have access to the funds can't, but our money can go a really long way. So I think that's the show.
That is the show.
Yeah. Unless we're gonna go back to dating.
I mean, we can really just go for it. Just get that conversation
2
going
hours,
on the back end of the show. 2 hour Voices River City.
Yeah, we'll be like the read. Every time I see the episodes, I'm like, my goodness, when are we gonna? This is a lot.
You're just increasing the speed as you look at it.
Right.
All right, listeners, if you hung on this long, you're a real one. Patreon.com Voices River City.
We love you, and hopefully I match with somebody.
Oh, Flo's out here trying to match with the listeners. Heyo.
Well, it wouldn't be me, it'd be my friend, but we'll enjoy the day.
Right. All right, until next week, folks. Bye.
Bye.